my name is Leslie Anderson. I'm the Chief Curator here at the National Nordic Museum. It's my pleasure to welcome you to What is Nordic Design, Denmark? Before I talk about this series, I want to thank the two funders, the Nordic Culture Fund and Arts Fund, for making this happen. This has been a series in development for quite some time, and we're thrilled to present 3 of the 5 programs over the course of this weekend. The idea was that we'd provide an introduction to Nordic design, but also examine the idea of national versus pan-Nordic design through these 5 programs, each dedicated to a country. And tonight we'll be treated to Denmark. Tomorrow at 11 a.m., please return for a program focused on Icelandic design, and on Sunday at 2 p.m. on Swedish design. The other purpose of this program is really to connect design historians, curators of design, directors of design museums, and other thought leaders in this area from the Nordic countries in the US. Now it's my pleasure to introduce this evening's speaker, Marie-Louise Høstbo. She has worked at the intersection of architecture and Danish design for over 2 decades. As head of design, Høstbo works strategically to curate collections, develop products, and continue to shape Fritz Hansen's legacy of exceptional and timeless design. An alumnus of the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Copenhagen, Høstbo achieved a master's degree in architecture in 2000. She worked as an architect at David Bretton Meyer's Tegnestue, and then at the Dansk Møbelkunstgalleri, one of the leading galleries in historic Nordic design. When she was there, she established galleries in Copenhagen, Paris, and Zurich. Her work consists of comprehensive research on the connections between architecture and design, both in Denmark and internationally, and she's also an accomplished photographer and writer. Her work has been published in a selection of books and articles. This holistic approach to her craft offers unique insight when collaborating with contemporary designers and creating new designs. After her talk, Marie-Louise will be joined by Dr. Monica Obniski for a conversation. Monica is a curator of decorative arts and design at the High Museum of Art in Atlanta, where she's been since March 2020. She's responsible for the Decorative Arts and Design department, including related exhibitions and programs, as well as its collection of more than 2,300 objects from the 17th century to the present day. She also leads the High's Piazza Activations, a multi-year initiative that launched in 2014 to animate the museum's outdoor space with site-specific commissions that engage visitors of all ages in participatory art experiences. Previously, she served as Demo Curator of 20th and 21st century design at the Milwaukee Art Museum. She oversaw an expanding collection of historical and contemporary design and managed an active exhibition program. You may be familiar with a recent exhibition that has been to many venues titled Scandinavian Design in the United States, 1890 to 1980. It was organized with the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, or LACMA, and as I mentioned, it's traveled to multiple venues. She also organized the exhibition Serious Play, Design in Mid-Century America, with the Denver Art Museum, and in previous appointment had been at the Art Institute of Chicago. We're so pleased to welcome these 2 distinguished speakers this evening. Please give a round of applause for Marie-Louise Høstbo.
So first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's a true pleasure to travel and be able to communicate about Danish design. So when asked what's Danish design, I think it's for a Dane, it's something that we take for granted. I grew up by the west coast in Denmark, and I wanted to be an architect from I was 10 years old, because when I traveled to visit my aunt outside of Copenhagen, she lived in this very, very beautiful place. She had kind of curated her home, picking up the pieces, and you felt safe when visiting, not only because my father and her, they just continued the dialogues they'd had since childhood, and the nice smell from her food, but it was also the way that she had curated her home. Later, I acknowledge that these were pieces that she handpicked. They were designed by Jacobsen, Kåre Klint, and Mogens Koch, just to make the home she wanted. In Denmark, there has been a collaboration between the developer, the builder, and the architect. So there is a connection with the architect for making these works of total design. In lack of a better word, we in Denmark use the German word Gesamtkunstwerk, where everything comes together. One of the first examples is the Copenhagen City Hall, where the architect Martin Nyrop creates a building where everything is done by hand. Industrialization came very late to Denmark, so it was also a manifestation of the Copenhagen city to show that craft was still very important. And of course, it was for a very, very long period of time. The Danish brewery, Carlsberg, built a whole area where they had architects designing several buildings. They continue to do so, and they actually still do. But one of the very, very first buildings they did in 1919, they asked Poul Henningsen, the PH light designer, to do lights for a concert hall they had. That's the light you see up hanging from the ceiling. This is one of the very, very first light designs he did before he got to be famous for his lampshades. You cannot talk about Danish design without talking about the exhibition in Sweden, in Stockholm, in 1930. It was designed by Asplund and Leverance, and every Danish designer and architect went. There is an anecdote that the Utzon family, so Jørgen Utzon, traveled there with his family, and when they got back home to Helsingør, north of Copenhagen, they got rid of all their interior and started living in this very minimalistic, democratic way. Just going back to Poul Henningsen, the PH line, it says upstairs in the exhibition that he designed lights to be used in spaces, and this is very important for Danish design, that it's always with a purpose and in connection to space. This is the Academy chandelier from 1931. He created this 3 shades to hide the bulb and not to get the glare from it when seated in the room at your desk. Another anecdote says that he actually did this design to honor his mother, as she was an aging author and didn't want to show off her wrinkles. Throughout the period, there is a transformation where what we today is known as the Danish Welfare Society is established, and the communities and the municipalities and the state is actually the builders of many significant buildings with distinct architects. One of them is the Søndermark Chapel, which is placed just outside of Copenhagen. It was designed by Fritz Hansen. He was inspired by both ways of working with concrete in France and with a more decorative way compared to what we normally see as the minimalistic part. So this is from 1932, and it shows the steam bent benches. They are still in the chapel 90 years after the inauguration, which is another significant part of Danish design. It lasts. The attendance to details and to materiality, these are done in beech, which was very convenient as it was growing in the forests in Denmark. This period of transition, you also see a lot of neoclassical tendencies in the lights of Poul Henningsen, and here with Fritz Legel, is a turning point. They were all trained in the traditional classical way, and of course they wanted to embrace the future, but in Denmark we never had a revolution, so everything is done in evolution from step by step. One of the significant steps are what was later called the functional tradition, which is a way of transforming the traditional way of working with bricks and then transforming it into a modern state in use for both public buildings and private homes. Kai Fisker was the key figure in this. He designed the Aarhus University, again with significant unique chandeliers by Poul Henningsen and chairs designed by Kai Fisker himself. He was not as distinct and detailed in his work with furniture, but he did beautiful silverware with Mikkelsen. The cowhides are also original from the inauguration. They worked with the Aarhus University to create a building site where everything was connected. So the spaces were in a human scale. They were all placed freely in a park that was also designed purposeful by a Danish landscape architect, Sørensen. And still today, if the university builds new buildings, it's in the yellow bricks and in the same style, but of course to the contemporary norms. As important as Kai Fisker is for the architecture and the transformation to a modernistic approach is Kåre Klint. Kåre Klint was the founding father of the modern furniture tradition in Denmark. He founded the School of Furniture at the Royal Academy in 1924, where he had his students measuring up all household items. So they were measuring up how much does tablecloth, tableware, glasses, how much space does it take up, and then they did the cabinets to hold these pieces. He was looking backwards, we would say today. He was learning from history, from joints and details from historic times. And he also had his students measuring up old furniture from the Design Museum in Denmark to make sure that they had the scale and the sense of where we come from. In 1936, he finishes a church in Copenhagen, which was originally started as a project by his father, P.V. Jensen Klint. And for this, he creates a chair called the church chair. This is a freestanding chair, which is not normally used in Denmark in churches, where we usually have benches. But this really, really light chair with seagrass seat and a small shelf in the back to the soundbook is also still standing in the church today. And of course, in the Grundtvigs Church, which was inaugurated a couple of years later, using the same chair and ideas. The first church was very rustic in the appearance of the brick, but for the Grundtvigs Church, P.V. Jensen Klint wanted the surface to be very even, almost like the walls had been plastered. So every brick is sanded, except one, because only God is perfect. This chair that was designed for the church also is significant in the way that a lot of the Danish design has been developed. This chair was developed to be used in a church but it was later used in many homes in Denmark without the shelf in the back. So in this sense, a lot of interconnections between the space for public use and the private home. I think we cannot talk about Danish design without mentioning Arne Jacobsen. He wanted to be an artist, but he was not allowed so by his father. So he became a bricklayer and an architect. But throughout his works, you see a significant part of it being very artistic. These images are from the Bellevue Theatre, just north of Copenhagen, where he created a whole city or townscape in a modernistic way. The bricklayers in Denmark were like a steady community, so it's all white painted bricks and not concrete, even though that was the inspiration from Le Corbusier. But inside the theater, he made the seat rows look like waves on the sea or in the sound next to the theater. When we talk about Danish design and the interconnection with design and architecture, a figure stands out, and that's Finn Juhl. He was trained as a designer at the School of Arts and Crafts, and he had a completely different, in a Danish perspective, go-to when designing. He wanted to design furniture that were freestanding and not necessarily connected to the space, but pieces that were able to be experienced from all angles. These images are from his home north of Copenhagen. That's now a museum, and it stands as when he lived in it. All the pieces are carefully selected by him, and of course they are in the very, very best quality. He was not trained as a cabinet maker, but he worked with Niels Vodder, who was a master cabinet maker, and they were both very persistent. So when Finn Juhl went to the workshop and said, I want to have this and this, and the cabinet makers told him this is not going to work, and he persistently argued that this needs to be done, and finally they agreed, and these very, very slim-lined cabinet makers' pieces were created. Images don't make it for the Finn Juhl pieces. They are to be experienced live, as many of the Danish design pieces. The most beautiful part of the table is actually underneath, where the thinness of the tabletop is created by an organic shape that is really just as beautiful to touch as to envision these spaces. More sturdy and solid in his approach to design is Berg Mogensen. This is from the Danish Co-op headquarters, where the canteen is still fitted with the chairs called the Focus Chair, designed in 1947 by Berg Mogensen. He is known to be the founding father's son, the one that really took over the ideas of Berg Mogensen. He stayed curious throughout his work, and in his home, which he designed himself, he kept on changing the rooms and the interiors, so the sons didn't actually know what to come back to, whether they were still in the same rooms that when they left in the morning. Another significant character in Danish design is Hans Wegner. Of course, I have to say you have the chair in the exhibition here in the museum. In 1949, the Danish annual exhibition, the Cabinet Makers Autumn Exhibition, was held, and the Danish state had invited a lot of international journalists, among them a lot of American journalists, and this was the starting point of the golden era of Danish design. Before this, Wegner worked at the office of Arne Jacobsen when completing the Aarhus City Hall. He moved back to Copenhagen, where he was asked by Fritz Hansen to do a chair with smaller pieces of wood, because there was a lot of scarcity during the Second World War. And he came up with this, actually 4 versions of the China chair. Of course, again, inspired by international ideas and an old Chinese chair in the Design Museum in Denmark. And this is, of course, made of smaller parts of wood, but it is as cabinet makers made in 1944 today as it was in 1944. Contrary to Finn Juhl, Wegner was trained as a cabinet maker himself. So when he couldn't persuade the cabinet makers to do it, he went to the workshop during the late hours and made it himself. In 1952, Wegner took a student of his from the Danish School of Arts and Crafts to Fritz Hansen and told the Hansen family that this young guy, he is really, really talented. You should hire him. The PK25 was done for his graduation project at the School of Art and Design, and it was actually purchased by his professor, Halldor Gunnløgsson, to be in his private house. Throughout his studies, he lived in a dormitory where he wanted to have a chair that was visually light and easy to move around. So he did the PK4. He did the webbing himself with his fiancée, the later architect Hanne Kjærholm, and the welding was done by Knud Holscher's father. And then they brought these chairs, to friends and family and sold them to what's like $3 or so. None of them are I think one of them is still exists. But in the same period, he designed the bowstring chair. And as you can see, it's the same construction. And his upbringing as a cabinet maker really shows off and shows how he could connect the tactility of wood into metal. In 1952, there is another anecdote that the Fritz Hansen company buys one of the Eames plywood chairs, puts it in the workshop, and tells Wegner, Berg-Mogensen, Arne Jacobsen, and Kjærholm to get inspired. This is what Kjærholm does, and it is, of course, way out of line. This is to be seen as a revolution in Denmark. And it was not in production until last year. Arne Jacobsen, on the other hand, designs the armchair. It is, of course, a striking piece of design, but Arne Jacobsen is a clever architect, and he puts an order of 300 chairs, which makes the company say, yes, let's do this, and starts manufacturing of the armchair. Convenient enough, the chair's got 3 legs, so the lunch hour at the pharmaceutical company Novo Nordisk will not last long or too long, especially as beers were still being served for lunch at that time. But this is really a significant point in time where Arne Jacobsen starts building more in the international style, and he brings in nature and organic shapes in his architecture with his furniture. The most significant part is the SAS Hotel in Copenhagen, and yes, it is inspired by the Lever House, where he designs everything. It was inaugurated in 1958, and the building, the door handles, the lighting, the furniture, everything was designed by Arne Jacobsen. Among the pieces was the egg chair that was designed to be placed in the lobby area of the hotel. with this turning possibility that you could actually turn away from the crowd and you could be privately seated in a large space. Today, only one room is left originally. That's the room 606. And it shows how this way of working with total design really pays off. We talk a lot about aesthetic durability, and I think we would all like to be in a space like this, where he takes in the color of the sky and the green fields in his color choices, and the panels in Vengay makes it very easy to move around in the space and do redecorations. When designing the Sats Hotel, Knud Holscher worked with Arne Jacobsen, and in a documentary he says that he was assigned to do the hotel rooms while Arne Jacobsen was on summer vacation. And when Arne Jacobsen came back, he said, "Oh, that looks nice, I'll take care of that light." That's a light in the background that's actually movable in the panels, so you can move it around for where you need the lighting. Upstairs in the exhibition, you'll see an image of the Poul Henningsen artichoke. This is a redevelopment of his working with shades of lighting, and he continued to work with this throughout his career. In 1959, he did a whole house, a house of the future, or the day after tomorrow, it was called in Danish. And not knowing what the future would be like, he thought, of course, we will be living with translucent lights, which makes this light impossible to light up a room, but with the right bulb, with a UV bulb, then it pays off. But you see the reflections to the artichoke and still no direct glare of the bulb. I talked about the starting point of the welfare society and how important it is in the connection of Danish design. In Denmark, there is a tendency to take this for granted. We know, or we expect, that the streets work. There is bicycle lanes, that we are nicely seated when going to school, waiting for the doctors. But when looking at it from the outside, it really shows how interconnected design and the welfare society is, and how it pays off that the municipalities actually decided to create design that made a good atmosphere for the people living in the cities. This is from Rødovre Library that was inaugurated in 1969, and it's still the same chairs that are in this public used place. The shell chairs have been repainted, but it's still in use today. The last part of Arne Jacobsen's design became more brutalistic, but still he used these organic shaped furniture to bring in scale and organic shapes. Danish design is interconnected with architecture. It has been so since 1924 that it was a part of the architecture school. There was a school of arts and crafts, a design school as well, with much more like industrial design, but the interconnection and that the pieces were designed with a purpose and for spaces has always been important. That was also important for Bodil Kjær. She was trained at the School of Arts and Crafts, but she traveled abroad just after graduating, and she worked with like furniture architecture throughout her career in Italy, UK, and the US, until she returned to Denmark, where she's actually still living, and I have dialogues with her when we're deciding on new colors for a light she designed in 1961. With the golden era, with Kåre Klint, Wegener, a lot of young designers have felt it as a burden to stand out and to move freely when everything they did was compared to the Golden Age. This is one of the reasons why Cecilia Mentz in 2000 did this tree for clothes. She actually mentioned it as disassembling her heritage. That's also how Jasper John describes creativity, that we take something we know, disassemble it, put it together, and do the same thing over and over again. And then, of course, when she continues to work, she finds her own way and encourages or takes in the history of Danish design, the Nordic light, the organic shapes, and the beautiful details. That also goes for the younger even generation, where there is a tendency to work with tactility more. Margrethe Odgaard works a lot with colors, wool, with the Danish company Kvadrat. Today, the building industry does not allow works of total design. But there is a tendency to use these furniture still and then make site-specific furniture once in a while. But a lot of the Danish young designers, they take in the historic places and then they use them as references and inspiration, as with the reflected surroundings by Maria Brun. This evening, there is an opening of the yearly designers exhibition in Copenhagen, where we did the theme, a piece for a place, where 36 contemporary designers have designed a piece for a place in and around Copenhagen, the city being the world capital of architecture this year. It's so interesting. I haven't seen the exhibition yet, but it's so interesting to see that the places they choose were all from this golden age. It continues to inspire. This is a very, very young designer, Lise Vester, from last year's exhibition, where she created a huge neon chandelier. She works a lot with the tactility and being connected to a place and turning the world upside down, as with this sphere. And I believe and I hope that this will be Danish design for the years to come, where we actually take what we know, what we have, and turn it upside down to form the future. Thank you.
I think you have given us a lot of really wonderful information, and you've really synthesized kind of the 20th century architecture and design in Denmark. And of course, our task this evening is to try to pick at what is Nordic design through the Danish lens. And as I've said, you have really given us a lot to think about here. And I think I was invited to participate and to be in dialogue with Marie-Louise because, as was mentioned earlier, as part of a larger exhibition project, I've had the great pleasure of traveling to Denmark for the last almost 10 years, making regular visits, doing this kind of research project that explored the design exchanges between the United States and the Nordic countries. And one of the things that our show and the publication attempted to do was to really challenge the norms of Nordic design, that it only embraces these ideals of simplicity, of minimalism, and functionality as being kind of one part of the narrative. And of course, your presentation really embraced all of those things as being kind of part of what Danish design, what Danish architecture and design is known for. And so I guess the first question is this Nordic design? Is this Danish design? And is there something that we're missing here? Is there, is this the kind of only thread? Yeah.
But it's thank you for the question, because it's really interesting. Earlier this year, I was in a panel talk with a young Swedish designer, and he was asked whether he saw himself as as a Swedish designer. And he said, no, 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 I'm international. And I'm like, okay, you are, you're really, really blind to what you have and what you've learned and how you're brought up. And of course, I think what I might be missing in this is the international influence. So when we talk about Danish design, of course, it's Danish because it's done in Denmark and they were trained in Denmark, but they sought international inspiration always.
Yeah. I mean, and you brought that in a little bit by talking about the Stockholm exhibition from 1930, which, right, was monumental for everybody in the Nordic countries, as well as, there were American architects that came over to see it because it was a really important exhibition. But yeah, I mean, I think even though I was privy to seeing the kind of slides, only while watching this, I thought, well, where the heck is Werner Panton in all of this?
Yeah, he left the country.
Right.
But I was like, when going through the slides today, because where's Nana Dietzel in my slides?
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And I think that's when you want to talk about Danish design in 40 minutes, not to say that there's not room for them in 40 minutes, but this is a high-level talk, but they were also very important.
Yeah.
There is currently a Nana Dietzel exhibition in Denmark that really, where they redid a lot of the spaces. She did, both Werner Panton and Dietzel, aimed for us to be living in these spaces where everything was soft, nice, comforting, covered it in Danish or Norwegian wool. So you could actually walk around barefooted and be caressed by the space. And experiencing this exhibition of Nana Dietzel, it was really interesting to see that, oh, that's a kid's room. No, that's actually how she envisioned us to live, and we're still not ready for it, as the Danes were not ready for the Kærholm chair in '52.
Sorry, you were saying this is the kids' room, meaning that you had thought that this was...
Her living spaces were experienced as children's spaces in the exhibition.
Wow.
Yeah.
Super interesting. And is she, I mean, she's a name that is, because that was going to be another question, where are the women? You did mention Hanna Kærholm at some point.
Yeah.
And Nana Dietzel is a kind of big name, but are there others? I mean, I'm thinking about this larger project of recovery that has started to happen for example, painters in the Nordic countries. There's been a lot of work done to recover women painters in the late 19th and early 20th century. Is that sort of thing happening for Danish design as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
As you can see, Bodil Kjær left the country as well. Just after graduating, she had ambitions, and she saw that it was impossible to live this in Denmark. Hanne Kærholm, the wife of Paul Kærholm, was trained as an architect, and she eventually became the first woman professor of architecture in Denmark. She was still a professor when I started studying.
Oh, wow.
And they divided the work between them. So she was solely on architecture. She used a lot of Kærholm furniture in her buildings. And there is a research being done where the women in Danish architecture, but not many.
Because there weren't many that were studying at the academy? Okay.
Yes.
Interesting.
A lot of couples then afterwards started working together, like Tove and Edvard Kind Larsen, Eva and Niels Koppel, and Karen and Ebbe Clemmensen, to mention a few.
Just to go back to Panton for a second, because I think one way of kind of getting at his work, even though, as you say, he left Denmark, is this kind of idea of an internationalism that you mentioned earlier, that is maybe another way your talk could have gone, right? Because you've kind of approached it from a very Danish perspective. And someone like Panton, right, even though maybe nationally he was a Dane, but didn't really practice in Denmark. And so how do you see kind of his output fitting into the Danish story? Maybe it doesn't.
Well, it's actually it's kind of interesting because he was as classically trained as all of them, and he worked with Art Jacobsen. At lectures, he often mentioned it very thoroughly that he was working on the Sevener chair, like it was his design.
Wow.
Later, Henning Larsen and my former employer, Britta Meyer, took the same. I did that, but I believe that he wanted something different. He worked with Fritz Hansen for a couple of years, Werner Panton, and did a series of furniture, but the Danes were not ready for it. And lucky enough for all of us, they were ready at Vitra.
Yeah. And I think the Americans too really kind of embraced it by the 70s as well. Yeah. I really appreciated you bringing in some of Poul Henningsen's lights because for me, as a kind of outsider looking at what happens in Denmark, that is something that really, not only because it's exported, but just this idea of kind of the quality of light is something that has been a preoccupation in the Nordic countries for a very long time. And it strikes me as maybe this is another way of kind of getting at what is Nordic design, right? And so I was also thinking back to, and I don't know if you've probably seen the new presentation at the Design Museum Denmark, in which they have they've got some collages of the artichoke lamp.
Yes.
Which they're extraordinary, right? Because they show exactly what you've said, this kind of idea of directional light and how the collage really suggests kind of what the three-dimensional form would look like in 2D form. Is what I'm getting at. But I wonder if you can, I don't know, maybe kind of hypothesize a little bit, and maybe this is also just a kind of romantic notion that I have, again, as an outsider, that because you're Danish, you must be preoccupied with light because you don't, get to see very much of it for most of the year, which is why, lighting designers tended to be, I don't know, I just think it's one of the kind of top of class in terms of kind of contemporary design, modern and contemporary design that comes out of Denmark, and whether you think that that's actually accurate or.
But back to taking Danish design for granted, I think that we take the Nordic light and how that has brought in attention to how we work with both with light but also with furniture. There is a reason why they are all so organically shaped, even the cabinet makers' pieces, the way that they take in light and caress the light coming in. Yes, we have a scarcity of light for half the year, but the light also differs throughout the day and throughout the year. And it's important to have furniture that encourages you to stay inside. I know that there's all this talk about hygge.
I wasn't going to ask you anything.
No, but I'm not go into this. But I think that's actually just a talk of we have to stay inside, so we just let's get the best of it. But Nordic light is really important, and I believe that. I think it's good to mention Poul Henningsen in this, but you can also see how organically shaped the alto pieces are, the Virkala pieces from Finland, and the glassworks from throughout the Nordic countries are really paying attention to this light that's not for granted.
I was also, again, just trying to get at this question of what is Nordic design, and just thinking about whether there is a kind of Nordic approach to architecture or design. Meaning, is there something inherently different about the way that your kind of education is or your schooling is that produces something that is that is different. And as someone who's gone to architecture school, I think perhaps you can speak on that a little bit.
First of all, earlier on, people used to be trained at a craft before they started at the architecture school. My father also wanted me to be a carpenter or cabinet maker before. I never really got to that, sorry. But in Denmark, there is a very flat hierarchy. So we have a tendency to be outspoken. So even as a young architect, I was allowed to be heard when we started new processes, and I think that's very important. The democratic way, and also the way of having this connectedness to society. Art has always been a connected part of architecture as well. You saw that from the Carlsberg building, but also for the Copenhagen City Hall and the tapestry at the National Bank.
I love also that you brought in some contemporary examples in the end. And I was just doing some kind of Googling recently and was reminded of an article that you probably didn't see, but it was earlier this year, and I'm going to reference the title. It was Danish Design Goes Wild. It was in the New York Times in January of 2023. Did you see this?
I missed that one.
Yeah, it was quite good. But the premise of the article was kind of trying to introduce some sort of tension into what we all think of is kind of Danish design, right? These beautiful Fritz Hansen things, and so the article goes into hay, right? The kind of colorful design that is coming out of that producer. The fact that Georg Jensen started making some more colorful wares, even fashion designers, right? Henrik Vipskov and Stina Goya doing like these just kind of very colorful, outlandish things, very different from what you're wearing. And yeah, so I wonder, because again, you alluded to this in some of the contemporary examples, but there's still a little bit of a restraint there.
Yes.
And so do you observe this sort of tension between kind of where some designers want to go in the future versus the kind of tradition that is, inherent in everything that you spoke about today?
Yes. I think what's very, very important to state in this part of the discussion is that Danish design is not a museum. And that's very important. We have a tendency to, we're sitting in chairs that were designed in 58, and they are still relevant because they are still, to be used in the spaces we live in. But we have to keep on learning, and we can do that from other perspectives. And as you're mentioning, Henrik Vipskov, he knows his history. He knows, the history of Denmark and the history of fashion, and that makes his foundation solid to work from. And of course, he is influenced from international fashion like Comme des Garçons, but he takes in this international influence, and he is, in my point of view, still very Danish. I see where you're getting at, but I'll say that you also have to search for those. Most of, back to the exhibition that's going on in Copenhagen, you'll not see any wild stuff, if I let you know.
Despite what the New York Times says.
Yes.
That's great. I'm going to ask one final question, which is, as Marie-Louise knows, I spent about 2 weeks in Copenhagen this past June, which, first of all, I've never been there in June, and it was glorious. But it was glorious also because, there was no rain. It was sunny every day. It was in the 70s. It was just extraordinary.
I know that it then started raining.
For 2 months.
Immediate, yes. I'm so sorry. But one of the things that, and of course, having traveled to Denmark so many times, but this was really the first time that I was there for a sustained amount of time, and I was really able, and I also got on a bike and did the things that I didn't do those things before, and so I guess what I'm getting at is you kept mentioning the welfare society, which is something that I felt when I was there for a long period of time. And whether it's the bike lanes and this kind of embedded infrastructure in Copenhagen to the really careful and thoughtfully designed contemporary architecture that is at a human scale, that really cares for the individual, there's something really, it's just extraordinary and beautiful what's happening in Copenhagen now. And so I guess the question is there something different that's happening there that's allowing for this kind of progressive architecture and design that frankly can't happen here in the United States, I think partly because of scale, but also I think that there are other kind of elements that are at play here.
And that's back to the tradition. And how we are brought up, and I think that there is a tendency to have this interconnected ways of working, that the schools, are designed in a good dialogue with both the teachers, the architects, the constructors, and this is very important to have this dialogue and connectedness. I was just reading a new book on Danish design that describes a city as a human body where everything is connected, and not to say that the municipality office is the heart, because the heart is actually in that sense all over the place, or perhaps the heart is the people living in the city. But we have to take care of where we live, and the closer we live in Copenhagen, the more we need to take care. And I'm pleased to hear that you experience it as a positive thing, because I really, really see a city also struggling. But then it's nice to have, the outside view of it, that it still works.
Yeah. Well, and nothing's perfect ever, and
No,
as long
only
as
God.
Yeah. To bring it back to the chapel. Thank you so much. Thank you for being a wonderful audience, and I think we're done.